Do you think that we are getting better or worse at getting in touch with that sense, that sort of true sense that you're pointing at inside ourselves, which knows what's good or bad or right or wrong, simply on the basis, I'm not talking about some kind of spiritual or divine sense, I just mean the sort of common sense that you're talking about, that you kind of have a little bullshit detector inside you that knows when someone else is hurting or when you're being a bit of a shit. I feel like politically and culturally at the moment, we live in such an amazing era that I fear that maybe we're not getting as good as we used to be about being in touch with when we're harming other people or wronging other people or not hearing other people. Do you have a sense of that?
That's a hard question to answer because, I'm only really exposed for the most part, at least firsthand, to, sort of American culture, to an extent, what's going on in Europe, stories I've done in Africa a little bit. But, if you're talking globally, I'm not really sure. I do think that there are markers of progress that really do indicate, positive change. I think the attempts to wipe out things that are just on the face of it and quite clearly bad, like female genital mutilation, the persistence of slavery, the stigmatization and torture and persecution of children seen as witches in certain African nations. I think there's been progress on gay rights, and I think all of these are positive indicators. But it's easy to be glib because the world is so vast. Who knows what's going on in China? There's some signs that it seems to be opening up, that there's more freedom, more environmental awareness, but I just don't really feel qualified to make a big statement on that.
I mean, I guess I was alluding more locally to just more parochially to the politics that we've seen in the West with Brexit and Trump and the rise of the alt-right and the rise of Marine Le Pen maybe in France.
I think on that stuff it's too early to say. We're still really in the immediate aftershocks of something, and time will tell whether that's just a sort of localized blip. I mean, on the Trump thing, don't you slightly feel that it's the last gasp of a sort of Christian white ethno-nationalist impulse, and that just on pure demographic basis alone, that's going to be a thing of the past in 20, 30, 40 years? Just the numbers, the rates at which different groups are reproducing means that it won't be feasible for much longer for a president to run a candidacy based on a sort of a coded appeal to white people.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about that, Louis. I think the data.
13% black people in the US, as I understand, about 13%, but a rapidly rising number of Latino. I don't know. Yeah, you tell me what you think, because it's not something I've studied, but that was my sense.
Yeah, I think your sense is right if you assume that white nationalism is intrinsic to the problem. I think your claim hinges on a faith that authoritarianism and strongman politics can't have a larger community of people who are not just brought together by their race or ethnicity, but also by a sense of being besieged from without by forces beyond their control, be those economic forces or forces of another religion like Islam. And I just worry that the coalition of the concerned could be expanded to include Latinos and could be potentially expanded. I mean, I don't know, I'm just sort of spitballing, but it strikes me that there's something more than just white nationalism going on. There's something more than...
What would you say is the common factor then? What is the kind of the core appeal of something like Trump or Brexit?
I think there is a sense that the world has been stitched up for a number of decades by phony elites who have done a deal between Wall Street and Washington, D.C. and lobbyists and whatever their counterparts in the UK are, that have systematically prevented decent, honourable working people from getting ahead. They've dismantled a Western civilization, or they've started chipping away at a Western civilization that was one of the greatest things that humankind had ever produced and had its kind of apex in the 1950s, I suppose, with the nuclear family and traditional Judeo-Christian values. and that an entire regime is coming apart at the seams, thanks in part to globalization, thanks in part to technology and robotics, and that nobody is hearing anybody scream. That people are screaming into the ether about all of this disruption that they don't want to be happening, and both left and right keep trotting out the same platitudes and cliches, and meanwhile, the Middle East is in flames and bombs are going off in major cities, and that the world is in crisis and no one's doing anything about it. So anyone who comes along and sounds like they're speaking truth, even if it's obviously fake truth, as long as they're lying to your face and being proud about it and not sniveling around in back rooms doing deals with shady bankers and stabbing you in the back, it's sort of almost a Weimar kind of view of the world, that I think. So to me, it has less to do with race and more to do with a sense that the elites have betrayed us and we need to take back power.
Well, I think there's something in that, but I don't know. It's so hard because you've thrown in a few different things. So it's hard to say which is predominating. And maybe it is a sort of a revolution of conflicting expectations, as they used to say.
I mean, I don't think it's coherent, is my point. I'm elucidating it as a mush because I think it is sort of a generic mush. But I think it's just as likely that you're totally right, and it's the last it's the last throes of something desperate, and we will all be trotting onto a brighter future. It's just that the brighter future doesn't seem as inevitable as it did 2 years ago to me.
You may well be right. What I would say, though, is that the stories that I do tend to be so far out of the mainstream that, in a sense, they're immune to many of the vagaries of changes of president, changes of regime. It's not something that I spend too much thinking about, but, someone said to me yesterday, well, what's the Westboro Baptist Church going to think now that Trump's in power? And I thought, well, nothing. They're going to think exactly what they thought the year before he was in power. They're going to think America is doomed and all politicians are going to hell and God hates fags, basically.
Yeah.
And by the same token, serial killers or pedophiles, on whom I've done two stories on sex offenders and pedophiles, and they are, I don't think the number of sex offenders is going to go up or down because of Trump. So
no, you're right. Let's get off politics.
Yeah, I'm very much. I work a kind of localized patch, and I suppose it speaks as well to what I was saying before. Is I do try not to get too grand or too metaphysical. I try and stick quite close to the ground and describe what I see.